this is MCB2 tutoring. This video is about steroid hormones. I did a video before, but it screwed up when I was saving it, so I'm redoing it again. So I just want to summarize what you need to know regarding steroid hormones for this MCB steroid hormone lecture. So you don't need to know everything. What's the most important is you need to know the end product of the pathways. So down here, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, or the sex hormones. You do need to know the enzymes that are relevant to disease. So end product here, and you need to know the enzymes that are relating to the diseases. And we'll go over all of the enzymes that we've talked about in the lecture. And you need to know the effects of the enzyme defects, but in pretty general terms so that you're able to distinguish one from the other. Then we'll talk a little bit more about hydroxylases in general, but we'll do that way at the end. Okay, so the whole pathway is about generating steroid hormones. The previous lecture was about how we made the cholesterol. So the previous lecture was about how we made the cholesterol. And cholesterol is used for pretty much making all of the steroid hormones. They basically have the same general structure as cholesterol. And what most of these steps are doing is they're just adding a hydroxyl group to various carbons on the cholesterol rings. And that's all these hydroxylases. So the number in the hydroxylase name corresponds to which position the OH is being added onto. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pathway in very general terms. And I will highlight the ones that you probably need to know by name, but most of them you do not. So cholesterol, when it comes into the cell, so cholesterol the cells can make from scratch, or they can get from the plasma in the form of LDL, and pretty much all the cells in the body have LDL receptors. So cholesterol enters the cell, and two steps needs to happen. So when they first enter, they're in the cytoplasm, and you have this translocation step that moves the cholesterol from the into the mitochondria. So this is into mitochondria. So this step is mediated by two enzymes, so TPSO and STAR. These two are both involved in translocation. They are the rate limiting steps, but they're not regulated. The next step is the actual enzyme. It's called desmolase, but it's also a cytochrome P450 side chain cleavage enzyme. It's just the different names for the same thing. And what that enzyme does is it acts on cholesterol, giving you the pregnenolone. So you probably need to know this one because it's one of the beginning steps that is highly regulated. And there are three types of products that you can have from this point on. So this pathway over here will give you the mineralocorticoids. The most potent mineralocorticoid is the aldosterone. Separate pathway will give you glucocorticoids. And most notable is the cortisol. And then the last set of pathways will give you sex hormones. And that includes your testosterone, your estrogen, so estrone and estradiol, they're all different forms of estrogen. And testosterone can be also changed into a DHT, which is a more potent form of testosterone. These steps are taking place in the periphery, so these are not in the adrenal cortex. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how this whole thing happens. Basically, with all of these endocrine organs, what happens is hypothalamus will send a signal, and that's in the form of some sort of releasing hormone. And the releasing hormone tells the anterior pituitary here to secrete ACTH. And ACTH then goes to the adrenal cortex, and that's what we just discussed, where adrenal cortex will give you all these three products. But out of all three products, so there's like 3 different sets of products, but out of all 3, only cortisol acts as a negative feedback, shown here in red. So these are the negative feedback. Only the cortisol acts as a negative feedback to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to tell them, we have enough products, we don't need to signal to make more. So later on, when we talk about many of these enzyme defects, you notice that they're all called, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. Okay, so all these are considered congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It's hyperplasia because, so hyperplasia means that there are more cells. So basically what's happening is that your adrenal cortex is not able to make the cortisol. So this negative feedback never happens. This negative feedback basically is not occurring. And since it's not happening, there's the ACTH is extremely high. It's always telling adrenal cortex to make more, but they're not able to. So they're trying to compensate by having more cells, thinking that hopefully they can make more cortisol if there are more cells. So that's why a lot of these enzyme defects result in lack of cortisol. Therefore, it's going to result in this hyperplasia of the adrenal cortex. Okay, so this is the general scheme of how this happens. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific enzymes. There are only these enzymes here in the chart that you need to know. So you need to know about all these enzymes and how they affect the production of these 3 products. And we'll go through each one of them. Okay, so first one, we'll talk about the 21 hydroxylase deficiency. So I'm going to highlight this in green. So 21 hydroxylase is right here, and it's here. So as you can see here, it's present in 2 of these pathways. So it's present in the pathway leading down to the mineralocorticoids, and it's present in the pathway leading down to the glucocorticoids. So what you would expect is with the 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency, you won't be making any mineralocorticoids. So there'll be a decrease in mineralocorticoids, and there'll be a decrease in glucocorticoids. But since you're not making, since the substrates are not going into making mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, more substrates are available for making the sex hormones over here. So you see an increase in sex hormones. And what that's going to happen is we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of each. So I have them down here. So when you have a mineralocorticoid deficiency, you will typically find an increase in blood potassium. You'll find an increase in hydrogen ions and potassium ions and a decrease in sodium ions. And this is because of what's happening in the kidney. I'm going to go down to this little image I have of the kidney. So this is the effect of aldosterone. So that's just the mineralocorticoid. this is what's its effect on the kidney. So what's happening is you don't need you just need to know here what's happening to these ions. So in the renal tubules, the cells lining the collecting duct basically have they do three things that are responding to three things are responding to aldosterone. So the absorption of sodium is relating to aldosterone. So if you don't have aldosterone, then less sodium is being absorbed. So that's why you have the decrease in sodium. And this potassium channel, where it's excreting potassium, is affected by aldosterone. So without aldosterone, you're not secreting as much potassium. So there's an increase in blood potassium. And there's this hydrogen pump here that is also controlled by aldosterone. So without aldosterone, there's an increase in hydrogen ions. So that would be a drop in pH. So decrease in pH. Okay, so these are the effects of mineralocorticoids. And if someone has anything that will give you less mineralocorticoids, you will see this set of effects. So the next thing is the glucocorticoids. Most important one here is the cortisol, which is here. Cortisol. And what happens with cortisol is when you have a cortisol deficiency, you'll have a decrease in blood pressure. You have a decrease in blood glucose. So remember, cortisol acts a lot like glucagon in many ways. And what glucagon does is it will help you do gluconeogenesis. So cortisol would also, so without glucagon, without cortisol, you'll have less blood glucose. And it's also involved in mobilizing lipids. So without cortisol, you'll have less lipid lysis or mobilizing fats. Okay. And then the last one is the sex hormones. So over here we're saying that the effect of 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency will result in increase in sex hormones. So increase in sex hormones will result in several things. For males, it will result in precocious puberty. So that basically means they'll have earlier puberty than usual. And for females, they'll have more masculine features. So that's virilization. And females will also have ambiguous genitalia. Okay, so basically we went over what each of these deficiencies or excess is going to have as a symptom. So now when I explain the next few deficiencies, just be able to kind of think about what kind of symptoms you will likely see from the patients. And I'm not going to go over this again, so it's written down here. So I would like you to just go through your deficiency and see which ones are increased or decreased, and then match it to the list down here of what the effects are. Okay, so the next one is the 11 beta hydroxylase deficiency. And let's find 11 beta hydroxylase up here. So as you notice, 11 beta hydroxylase is here and here. So they look very similar to where 21 alpha hydroxylase is. And so for the most part, they are very similar. However, the effects on mineralocorticoids is a little bit less than the 21 alpha hydroxylase, because the most potent form of mineralocorticoid is the aldosterone, and that is not affected by the enzyme 11 beta hydroxylase. So this one is still okay. So this is the stronger one. And this is the weaker one. Corticosterone. So you might have slight decrease of the mineralocorticoids, but it's not going to be as pronounced as the 21 alpha hydroxylase. But for glucocorticoids, you're still going to see a decrease. So still a decrease in glucocorticoids. And because less of the substrates are being used for mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, you're still going to see an excess in sex hormones. So many of the symptoms are very similar, but you must also remember that 21 alpha hydroxylase is the most common form of the congenital adrenal hyperplasia. I think it was somewhere around like 90 to 95%. So most common. Is this one, is the 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency. So on an exam, if they ask you what's the most, so if they give you a list of symptoms that sound very similar, so these two might sound very similar. If they give you a list of symptoms that sounds like this, but they ask you for what is the most likely cause, then it would have to be 21 alpha hydroxylase, because being more prevalent and more common, you would think that this is the most likely cause of those symptoms. Okay, so the next one is the 17 alpha hydroxylase deficiency. So this one is going to present different from the 21 and the 11. Let's go find 17 alpha hydroxylase up here. So 17 alpha hydroxylase is here and here. And notice with the 17 alpha hydroxylase deficiency, you won't have any problems making mineralocorticoids, so that's fine. But since this pathway goes over to the production of glucocorticoids and the sex hormones, you have a deficiency in the production of glucocorticoids, and you have deficiency in the production of sex hormones. But however, since the substrates cannot be used to make glucocorticoids and sex hormones, there are more substrates available for making mineralocorticoids. So you have an increase in mineralocorticoids here. Since this is different, we'll talk a little bit about what you would expect to see. So this is kind of different from the first two. So instead of a decrease in mineralocorticoids, you have an increase. So what we mentioned down here would be the complete opposite. So down here we're saying you have an increase in, so for mineralocorticoid excess, you would have a decrease in plasma potassium. You have a decrease in, so you have a decrease in potassium, you have a decrease in hydrogen, but your sodium, your serum sodium would increase, so it would be a hypernatremia. And instead of having a lower pH due to this, you actually have a increased pH, so it would be acidotic. And then the opposite would happen with the glucocorticoids. Oh no, actually, the effects on the glucocorticoids would still be the same. So you would still have a cortisol deficiency. So it's a decrease in blood pressure, increase in blood glucose, decrease in mobilization of the fats. And the effects on sex hormone is that you'll have less sex hormones. Okay. And then the next one is the 3-beta dehydrogenase. And let's find that up here. Okay, so another note about the 3 beta hydrogenases that you notice the other one are all called hydroxylases. So all these hydroxylases are some form of cytochrome P450. And being cytochrome P450, they all use an NADPH, which came from hexose monophosphate shunt, and they all use an oxygen. And hydroxylase, it gets rid of a hydrogen, so the hydrogen comes off and it gets formed into a water molecule. But 3 beta dehydrogenase is not a cytochrome P450. Okay, so this is where 3 beta dehydrogenases. So as you notice, it's affecting all 3 pathways, right? So you have a decrease in mineralocorticoids, decrease in cortisol or glucocorticoids, and you have a decrease in sex hormones. So this is not a very good scenario because these are all very important for homeostasis. So these people do not live very long after birth or if they're born at all. So this is pretty fatal. Don't live long. So you probably expect this clinical vignette to be about like a neonate or infant that had many problems and passed away very quickly. So if it's someone older, it's not likely to be 3 beta dehydrogenase defect. Okay, and then the last one we're going to talk about is the 5-alpha reductase. And 5-alpha reductase is right here. So the 5-alpha reductase is not a... So 5-alpha reductase is not found in the cortex. It's not found in the adrenal cortex. It's found in the periphery. It's in like your hair follicles and your sebaceous glands. So they're basically not found in the adrenal cortex. But what it does is that it converts the testosterone into DHT, which is a more potent form of testosterone. I'll write that here. This is like a potent testosterone. So if you have a DHT deficiency, so you're technically not having a deficiency in sex hormones because you can still produce the same amount of testosterone, but with a DHT deficiency, you can present with a male genotype, but since it's lacking this more potent form of testosterone, phenotypically they'll appear to be more female. So it's almost like hermaphrodite. They almost appear like a hermaphrodite. So these people will probably be raised as girls, or they kind of lived all their life as girls until puberty, but they're genetically male. And let me just highlight that for 5-alpha reductase defect, you expect your mineralocorticoids to be normal. You will expect your glucocorticoids to be normal because none of these are occurring in the adrenal cortex. And then for the sex hormones, you only see a decrease in DHT. Okay, and so now we've gone over all of these deficiencies. I just like to point a few more things out, more in terms of the terminologies that were used. So we went over and talked about the idea of hyperplasia, why that would occur. So basically it's because cortisol is not produced, so lack of cortisol is negative feedback. So let me go back to that other chart up here. So if you don't have cortisol, There's no negative feedback to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, so they're thinking that you're not making enough product, so you need to make more, but you're not able to, so they're trying to have more cells in the adrenal cortex so that they're better able to produce the hormone. So basically, you have an enlarged adrenal gland, you have a hypertrophy, more cells in the adrenal gland due to the lack of negative feedback. So all of these, except for the 5-alpha reductase, all of these are considered a congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So all of these are congenital adrenal hyperplasia. But there are only 2 of them that are considered the androgenital syndrome. So androgenital syndrome is referring to the excess production of sex hormones. And if you notice here, there are only these 2 that are giving you excess. So these 2 are considered I don't even know if I can fit this in. Okay. Androgenital syndrome. It'll be these 2 only. And just as an aside, this is not really considered any of those, but if, let's say, you have a tumor in your anterior pituitary that's producing a lot of ACTH, so you just have an excess of ACTH production, you will have an increase in all of them, all of the mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and sex hormones. So this is it about the steroid hormone synthesis. So make sure you know what we covered in this video. Normally a test question is regarding one of these enzyme deficiencies. They'll give you a clinical vignette of, maybe a male with precocious puberty or a female with, ambiguous genitalia, and then they'll tell you, oh, there's salt wasting, so that'll be this. So salt wasting. Is a term they use for the mineralocorticoid deficiencies. And then, they'll ask you what's the most common cause. So a lot of the exam questions are formatted like that. So make sure you know these enzyme deficiencies.